Alright, so here we are. We're going to start drawing this picnic table and all of its 3D parts. But I would rather not walk you through this entirely from beginning to end because that will take too long. So I'm going to work with the one I've already got, and we're going to go over the important parts. So step one, start with a sketch. And let's define the sketch properly so that everything comes in black and not blue. So I started this sketch at the origin, and I just picked a part to start with. In this case, I picked a part F. F is part of the tabletop over here. And I'll go ahead and zoom in. F is 48 inches long by 7.5 inches wide, extruded to 1.5 inches. So there's my 48, my 7.5, and you guessed it, my very first extrude is that shape. And that's going to give me my first part. So that's all I've got right now. What else did I do? Well, now I wanted a few more parts. So I copied that part. So you can always right click a part and choose copy. And when you do that, you'll get another copy that you can then drag around. So that's why you see some of these transforms here. So if I turn on my next part, I copied that part and I used a transform to drag it around. So how do you do the transform? You can't be in sketch mode, you got to be in 3D mode. And what you do is you grab a part, and I'm going to go full screen for this for a second so all of my toolbars show up. Let me get out of that transform. So you grab a part and your transform button is right there at the top. It looks like those two cubes and some arrows. And if you hit the drop down next to it, you've got wrap under that. But all we're working with is a transform. And once you pick a part and you click transform, you're going to get some options here. In this case, red options. Because it's by default wants you to translate by line, moving the object based on some other thing that already exists on the page or in the drawing, which we don't have and I don't find super useful. I like translate by X, Y, and Z, because then you can enter some measurements. You can also drag it around to see which number up here changes, so you know which one of these you need to change in order to get this part where you want it to be. So that's all I did, was I translated by XYZ, and that gave me my first transform here. And I made sure that these two boards, just like in the drawing, were 1/4 inch apart. Well, I did not go back to where it was. There we go. So now I've got two boards. Well, guess what? Since I'm working with these boards, I made another copy and I transformed it. And I made another copy and I transformed it. So I had the beginnings of my tabletop. Nothing super complicated yet. So I've got all four part Fs. Now I wanted part G, which is this little board right in the middle of the part Fs. I left a blank for it as I was putting the part Fs in their right place. And so part G is right here. It's only 3.5 inches wide instead of the 7.5 that the others were. So that required a new sketch. And let me turn that one off. Turn this one on. There's my new sketch. Okay, 3.5 by 48. I aligned it with the corners here. And if I open this up, you will see that everything is black and well defined. I spaced it 1/4 inch off of here. And it's not 1/4 inch off of here. This is interesting. It's not 1/4 inch because if I close this sketch, it suddenly becomes 1/4 inch. When I made my transforms, I made them in 3D space, so they apply in 3D space. And the second I go into this sketch, I'm not in 3D space, and the transforms aren't in effect yet. So you can't see that I moved this board an extra 1/4 inch away from this. And I did that by accident, so it may not work that way for you. I did that because at first I got the number wrong and had to go in and add an extra 1/4 inch to move it over far enough. And then when I came back and did the sketch, it doesn't show that. So anyway, there's my sketch, 3.5 by 48. You'll notice there is no 48 on here. That's because I constrained it to be the same height as the other sketch beside it, so that I wouldn't have to over-constrain this object. And then I extruded that, so let's go ahead and turn on the extrusion for part G. So now I've got the whole tabletop. I generally like to build the tabletop first for this drawing. You could theoretically build any part you want to. But this gives me a way to tie everything together based on where that tabletop is. So from there, there's my fourth transform. And in fact, you can drag these around in order of operation. So that was where I fixed the fact that this was too close. Let me drag this up here. And now I'm curious. If I open that sketch, does it look like it's an extra 1/4 inch away? Oh, it does. Okay, so I should have moved that transform up above earlier, and then it wouldn't have looked confusing. All right. Well, anyway, there's that. You can drag your transforms around if it helps to make sense of things. So what did I build next? Well, first I just spun this around in a way I did not intend to. I want to go back to that kind of 3D isometric view. I'm going to hide the sketch for part G. The extrusion for part G is right there. Sketch 2, I'm going to turn on, as you can see, was the legs. Now, if I open up sketch 2, you'll notice I've got all my key dimensions here, including the 32 I talked about in that first video. Notice how the 32 measures to a corner that's no longer here? You still have to treat this like it was cut as a square board and then shaped. So if this were a square board and I wanted a 130 degree angle here, well, I would make a 130 degree line and then I would cut off the rest of the board that I didn't need. So that's how you're going to think about that as you're building this. Quickly, how do I build this? Well, I drew a rectangle, honestly, and then just threw some lines across and measured the angles and get it in the right place. The big thing is I constrained it to be right in the middle of part G, the bottom of part G. And I also put in a center line. Now that helps with reducing the amount of work I've got to do, because once I had this part right, I could simply mirror it over to the other part. And one leg done, and it instantly became 2 legs. Notice I have not just the 32 dimension here, but I've also got this 27.385 dimension. I only did that because if you get rid of it, it doesn't know exactly where this line is in relation to the origin and some of the other objects on the page. So because of that, I quickly dimensioned this line just so everything was well defined, even though that is not a dimension that's useful on this drawing anywhere. Where are the dimensions that are useful for this drawing other than right here? Well, they're all right here. You got 50 degrees, 50 degrees, no indicator of center, but it's a symmetrical object, so yeah, center. And look at part A, it's the leg, 32 inches, 5.5. Okay, 5.5. I've seen people make a mistake of thinking part A and part F were exactly the same, and they made that 7.5. It's not 7.5. Don't make that mistake. Always look at your part label and then go and compare it to the parts lists so you're working with the right dimensions. Okay, so after that sketch, I then extruded part A. So let me turn that on. And you can see that part A is not where the sketch was. And that is because there was another transform involved. In this drawing, the legs are not way out here on the edge of the table. They're in. There's a 7.5 inch gap from the edge of the tabletop and the seat to these braces that are holding up the tabletop and the seat and attached to the legs, and an extra 1.5 inches to get to the legs. So those legs are in 9 inches. And how did I do that? I did that with another transform right here. So after extruding the legs, they were here. I then transformed them in 9 inches to get them where they needed to be. I then wanted to do a mirror because I didn't want to have to redraw these legs and get them on the other side. So if I turn on the other A, and the other A, and the other A, there they are. You can't mirror in 3D space unless you have, just like in 2D space, something to mirror around, some magical midpoint. When you are working on an object out here, like part A, and you go up top, notice I'm not in a sketch. These are all my 3D tools. You go up top, there is a mirror option. But when you click it, it wants to know a mirror plane, and there's no way to like grab the middle of this tabletop and just say, well, the middle of this tabletop is the mirror plane, get over there. You're going to have to build that plane first. And that's why you'll see that in addition to, well, I've got my planes turned off. There we go. In addition to the sketches and the mirrors and the transforms, I have a long mid-plane here, and I have a short mid-plane here, and we did that, or I did that, for mirroring purposes. The names don't look like they make a whole lot of sense, because you can see right here, short mid-plane seems like a pretty long plane. It's running the whole length of the table, and long mid-plane is this little short guy right here. You can name them whatever you want. They could just be plane 1 and plane 2. That doesn't matter. I just did it because this one I'm going to use to mirror things from one end of the table to the other end. So I'm going to go in the long direction with this. And this one here I just used to mirror from one side of the table to the other side of the table. So I went in the short direction. So even though the planes look longer and shorter based on their names, that's how I used them. So what I did was I created this plane. How do you create this plane? Well, there is a plane button up top. If you are working in a smaller window, the plane button generally still stays as a visible button with a drop down next to it, with all sorts of other tools that we're not using right now. So you would click that plane button, and then what I chose from this drop down was a mid plane. And based on that, it wants 2 planes, and it will calculate a middle plane between those. So what would 2 planes be that's going to be halfway in the middle of this tabletop? Well, any end plane, like this one, and any other end plane that matches it, like this one, and you can see it's creating a plane right in the middle. So that's what I did, is I created that plane, and then I named it long mid plane, just so I could find it easier if I had to make more. And then when I did my mirror, it wanted to know what plane I needed to pick, so I picked that plane. So if I were to do this again, yeah, I'll just pick one of these legs again. So part A, I'm going to hit the mirror button. I'm going to click on plane, and then I'm going to pick it over here, because it's hard to pick here. There's a lot going on. So I named it long mid plane, and it's going to create a new object over here. You can't see it because there's already an object over there, so they're overlapping. I'm just going to cancel that for now. Okay, moving on. So there was my mirror to get the 2 legs over there. Now I went to another sketch. Let's turn that other sketch off. I'm going to turn the previous sketch off. There we go. And I'm going to turn my planes off for now too, just so they're not confusing. So P is the shortcut to turn off your planes. Okay, as you can see from this sketch, I sketched out one of the seats, and I put it roughly where it needed to be. Not exactly, but roughly. And then I extruded it. So let's go to the extrude, which is, which one? Nope, 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 nope. I lost where I was. Sketch 4, it's got to be, there we go, extrude 5. So I extruded that, which gave me a part C. Totally wrong. It was not a part C. What part is that? Is that a D? I'm going to have to go over here. It is a D. Okay. Let me turn on my D. Okay, once I had that, I think I just left it there, honestly. It's not exactly in the right place yet. I then created a midplane, which you can see, those are the same things we talked about earlier, midway between this side of the table and the other side of the table. I then mirrored that extruded seat over to the other side. So now I've got both of them turned on. I then did another sketch. Turn that on. And I've got a lot going on right now. Hang on a second. Get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that. Okay. There's my sketch there. And I feel like I missed something. I don't know why. But I feel like I sketched this part first, and I'm not seeing it. Which sketch was that part of? There's something the seats sit on. It's not that sketch. Oh, it was part of sketch 3. That's right. I decided I wanted to put these boards in place first, so that you could actually have something to base those seats on. And so I just jump right in here. You can see, if I open up sketch 3, there's one board, everything is black, everything is well defined. There's the other board under it, everything is black and well defined. I've got my dimensions from over here in this drawing, and that includes these corners. Notice I didn't even bother trimming them off because I knew I was going to go to a 3D object. So the 2D sketch didn't need to be super clean because I could just extrude this space and not worry about that corner. But to get that corner, I measured in 1.5 with a line at a 135 degree angle, and then I mirrored it. Now there's no middle line here for mirroring purposes. Well, there could be if you left on one of the earlier sketches, because I did have a midline for the legs when I did those. So I just turned that sketch back on so I could grab that line for mirroring purposes. And I drew that. I drew this same way. So I'll just bring those dimensions back. You got your 2.5 here, your 45 degree angle, and I just planned on extruding this area, so I just ignored the corners, didn't even bother to trim them off. And once I did that, I had my parts. Let me turn on part C on both sides. And what is that part? That's part B. Okay, so there's part C, part C. There should be another part B somewhere. Well, looks like I didn't label part B. I left it as part 16. Okay, there it is. And notice they are also not way out here on the edge. I set up these legs as my sketch plane. So when I started a new sketch, I just clicked on those legs first, sketch. That way it was already where it needed to be. And that part was pretty much done. And you can see my seats are on my braces. Everything there is right. Those measurements are a little tricky, by the way. How far down do you put these braces before you put the seats on them? Those measurements are over here, and most people have a hard time finding them. There's your seat. There's your tabletop. Well, if you come down 4 3/8 from the bottom of the table, you're going to find the top of the seat. But that's the seat, not the brace. You got to go down an extra 1.5 inches after that to find the top of that brace. And then you can put that in and put your seat on top of it. All right, I think at this point you're starting to get the hang of it. That's how you put together this picnic table. The last thing I did was I went to the inside of this leg. It's a little hard to see. Right in there. And there's the last sketch. So if I turn on sketch 5, you can see I locked it. It's all black. It's all well defined. I locked it to the midpoint of this line here. For those of you who are still struggling to get your midpoints to line up, a great trick is to use the point tool And literally, if I wanted to do this again, I would draw the rectangle just somewhere over here and get it to be the right size. And then I use the point tool and I find the midpoint. You can hover over and there's a midpoint. Now I could use the midpoint constraint and say put that on some other midpoint. So I can put it on, let's put it somewhere where you're going to see it. Let's put it on this midpoint. And go right from the front view. It's lined up perfectly with that midpoint. And now because of that, even though these are just random dimensions, this thing is well defined because it starts on that midpoint and it's got dimensions both horizontally and vertically in the X and Y. So it's happy. We're going to cancel that because I don't want that object. But anyway, I drew that sketch and then I just extruded that sketch. And if you're wondering how far to extrude it, well, you don't even have to do the math there. I just extruded it to the next face. So if I find that extrusion, I think it was this one. It was not that one. This one? Aha. It just says up to next as far as the distance goes. So it was not a blind extrusion that I had to enter a dimension for. And that's how you're going to build this picnic table out of individual parts. And that's how you're going to end up with 16 individual parts. There are great uses for this. This is a great way to model things. However, there's another way. And we're going to look at that in the next video for the next drawing.